Okay. Hi, everyone. I think it's good to start now. Thank you for joining our webinar, everyone. And my name is Claire, and I'm a country manager of ERM Korea. Now, today, ERM and GRESB will host on the agenda ESG and Net Zero. And this is especially for real estate investors. So hopefully the APG and OCBC cases will be very helpful and then a great benchmarking cases for Korean investors, including Asia. Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I can see there's still a few attendees arriving, so I'll just wait for a few more seconds. Well, shall we begin? And anybody else who joins later, we can we'll be able to pick up on the way. So if we could move forward one slide, please. Oh, go back one.
Okay. Yeah. To begin with, I want to start with this chart. With this chart, I want to emphasize that the sustainable finance is a global agenda, and it's not only from the European players. This is for the global. And if you can see, European unions, they have EU taxonomy last year, and Finance for Tomorrow in France, and Innovation Lab for Climate Finance in Brazil. And even in China, they have Green Finance Committee. That means that every country have set their own policies for the sustainable finance. So every investors need to prepare for the sustainable finance integration. So this is not a good to do, this is must to do. This is an inevitable global trend. I want to emphasize on that. And I hope every audiences will learn their benchmarking cases from the global leaders. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Ben.
So I picked this image and this quote to sort of really reference the times that we live in. I started as a former fund manager and started my ESG journey 15 years ago. And it's really, I think, last year where we saw COVID coming along, a systemic risk, and how that's really strengthened conviction across capital markets and across societies that we need to address systemic risks. Of course, the big one being climate change, which we can see there, although we need to get through COVID, we need to get through associated recessions as well. And I'd say that if I've been in Asia for about 10 years now, and I'd really say that there was a tipping point from 2016 where the Asian investors started to really pick up and get on board and make progress. Most recently, we've seen Asia really starting to set out ambitions on climate change. South Korea in October set its ambition to go net zero by 2050. There are similar long-term targets in 2050 and 2060. So we wanted to share a little in this webinar here from capital providers, APG, capital arrangers such as OCBC, and then also providers of tools and solutions, GRESB and also ERM, to get a better sense of what real asset investors can do. Next slide. And just to share a couple of upcoming dates with you. So the first upcoming date is that the GRESB participation window opens on the 1st of April, and it carries on until the 30th of June. So any of you that are thinking that you would like to participate in GRESB and take advantage of the ESG rating tool for real estate, this is the decision period. And if you've got any further questions, Ji-hee Moon and myself, Ji-hee's on the call, we're conducting our career roadshow from the 5th to 9th of April, and happy to have calls with any of you if you've got any questions you'd like to take offline. Next slide. So I'd like to just very briefly introduce our speakers today. We've got Jonathan Waite from APG to share the views of a large global institutional investor that's really been on the leading edge of many of these issues. Then we'll hear from Eric Landry from our team at GRESB. He'll share more about how GRESB works and what net zero means. Yunmi Jiang will then provide the perspective of an Asian bank that is helping their clients develop and present and issue green finance instruments to the market. That's been growing particularly strongly, and particularly in Singapore for real estate. And finally, we'll come to Claire Seo again, and hopefully she'll ground these comments. She'll present a summary and some of her own thoughts on how to advance the ESG journey from whatever position you're in. Just before we get started, the quick housekeeping comments. So we're very keen to interact with you during the session. We'd like to invite you to submit any questions you have via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to answer as many incoming questions as possible during the panel discussion session. So we'll have the speakers 10 to 15 minutes each, and then afterwards a panel discussion. Please note that the webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be published on the GRESB website. And also, if you experience any issues with audio or video, please let us know via the chat function. The chat function's also at the bottom of your screen. So let's move forward and start with Jonathan Waite. Jonathan, perhaps you could introduce yourself first and then present. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Good afternoon, everybody. Just turn my camera on so you can see my face. Or I think somebody will do that for me. If we could just move to the next slide, please, just to get me in my flow. Yeah, my name is Jonathan. I'm a responsible investment manager at APG Asset Management. I'm based in Hong Kong, as the picture shows, but cover all of our investments across Asia Pacific. So my expertise is pretty much real estate. That's my background, but I also cover all of our infrastructure and natural resources investments, all of our private investments, that is, in the Asia Pacific portfolio. So I'm part of a team of ESG professionals, and we're integrated very much into the deal teams in APG. So we're part of the decision-making process about what APG invests in, how we invest, the conditions we attach to those investments. And then also I have an important role in engaging with the existing investments to try and improve their performance. Next slide, please. So if you don't know APG, I'll just go through this very quickly. But APG is an asset manager, and they manage effectively 30% of all pensions collected in the Netherlands, which as of, I think, February 2021 was about 568 billion euros. 75% of the pensions are managed in-house by, just being asked to turn my camera on, managed in-house by our various teams around in the Netherlands, New York, and in Hong Kong. And responsible investment principles are very much baked into everything that we do. I'm trying. Is my camera on? Can someone just tell me if my camera's on? I can't see myself, but maybe I am. Maybe it's fine.
Yes, it is.
Okay, great, thank you. APG have several responsible investment targets or ambitions, but the ones that I guess are most relevant to this audience and that relate to real estate are shown on the slide here. So we aim for 20% by 2025 for 20% of our assets to contribute to the SDGs. And we have a framework which you can find on our website that shows how we measure our contribution to the SDGs. We aim to reduce by 40% the carbon footprint in our investments, and that's based on 2015 levels. So that's clearly an ambitious target. We're on the way, but there's still more to be done. And then also our plan is to double the number of investments that have green building certifications. So, and with a real focus on in-use certification, because we are very, very interested in understanding the asset level data of our investments. And that's not just the private markets that I work in, but also public markets. We're now starting to get information, with the help of GRESB, on individual assets and their individual energy and also water performance, but predominantly energy performance. And then the final one is we're also looking to invest in more circular companies. So materials companies and other kind of things that some have an overlap with real estate. So next slide, please. So with regards to net zero, APG are actually part of a group of investors that have developed and are now starting to implement a net zero investment framework. Next slide, please. So that group is 70 global investors. It accounts for 16 trillion, I think, 16 trillion euros of assets under management. And the idea of that framework is not to become another standard or another thing for people to comply with, but it's very much a tool in order to help companies, real estate companies, put a plan together to achieve net zero. So I'm going to take you through some of the basics and some of the principles of that just now. So next slide, please. So I hope you can see that on your screens. So the first area really covers off what we describe as like the portfolio level. So this is setting goals, this is putting together a strategy, and this is putting together a number of sort of performance objectives that can be used to kind of measure performance. So one of the key things that I get frustrated about in working with real estate firms is that I work with a lot of businesses that have very lofty goals of achieving net zero by 2050. But what we want to see is not just that ambition, but the strategies in order to achieve that. So what are the targets? What are the medium-term targets, emission reductions to meet that end goal? And also then starting to look at different scenarios, looking at how your different asset classes are going to contribute to that. So really starting to get into the detail of how those different assets all collectively comply with a net zero target. And later on in my presentation, I'll talk a little bit about how APG defines net zero, or one of the frameworks we use to define net zero. But this is very much a framework of, you can see on here, it's a tick box exercise to some degree. You can go through this framework and say, yes, have we done this? Yes, have we done this? Or have we not done it? And it's APG's view that this is an excellent way of, it's an excellent framework in making sure that you have a strategy in place to achieve net zero. It also includes things like TCFD, other risk assessments, ideally publishing a clear action plan, strategies, metrics, and targets. So it's very much, this section is very much about the holistic kind of view for the business and having a plan that shows your ability to go from your current emissions level to net zero, typically by 2050. Next slide, please. This is then moving on to the asset class level. So you see, as before, we were talking about portfolio. This is now looking specifically at either at assets individually or a type or a selection of assets. So one of the things it asks for is around setting goals, around investing in assets that are aligned to certain climate scenarios. It's about screening assets that don't meet your criteria, or it's about adding in assets that do. It's talking about having an engagement with your supply chain, about how you can change assets or move them towards being net zero. One of the key things that I'd stress here is that we recognize that with real estate there is always this tenant and owner tension. Often both have the same goal in terms of reducing emissions, reducing spend on energy, but the timing and the investment and the roles and responsibilities around improving assets is often a little bit of a sticking point. So that's why this part of the framework includes things that are around implementation. So it's about focusing on your supply chain, focusing on that tenant and landlord arrangement. And then the final thing is really about direct actions on making improvements. So putting a plan together to show how the strategy is being implemented. Next slide, please. And then the final one, you'll note that actually it's quite a simple and straightforward framework, or certainly the elements I'm showing you are. There is a very detailed PDF that you can find. There's a hyperlink at the bottom here. It's probably a little bit small, but I'll perhaps see if we can get it circulated at the end, because it's a very, very useful and succinct document. But anyway, the final piece is around policy advocacy and market engagement. So not just doing these exercises internally, but it's about disclosing a policy. It's about being advocates in a market. It's about engaging if you've got other asset managers or you've got other parts of your supply chain, working through with them to make sure that they understand the strategy, they understand what you're doing as well. So using the influence your business has to facilitate this kind of change within the market. So just to go back through, we've got portfolio level and fund level strategy, policy, and approach. We then have asset level focus, engagement with supply chain, engagement with tenants, and then this final piece here is very much the external. It's using your business to be an advocate to kind of push the decarbonisation and the net zero agenda forward. So that's the framework. If we could move to the next slide, please. I'm just going to explain how, in simple terms, what APG is going to be doing around applying that framework and using that framework. So first off, obviously, we are going to need to identify what percentage of our assets or investments are aligned to a decarbonisation pathway. So I'm going to explain a little bit about what we mean by decarbonisation pathway, because it's relatively it's sort of newish terminology. And by pathway, it's really a move from current emission levels to future, effectively zero emission levels. And we call that the decarbonisation pathway. So it's the route from your current emissions to future net zero. APG's confirmed that we're going to be using the GRESB pathways, which I think one of the speakers coming up next will be talking about. The GRESB pathways for Asia have been developed, but they are still in draft form. So we as APG are working with GRESB to comment on those and improve those. So first off, identify what assets are aligned to a pathway. Choose your pathway as well. That's obviously important. So we've adopted the GRESB pathways. In order to look at those pathways, we're going to need asset level energy data. So we're going to need to know the grid electricity or even the gas kilowatt hours per meter squared and the carbon factors at the asset, very much the asset level, and then also any on-site renewable energy. And then finally, in order for us to facilitate collecting that data and using the GRESB pathways, we actually require all of our new investments to report via GRES, and we've been doing that for a very long time at APG. So next slide, please. So now I'm just going to talk through a little bit about the decarbonisation pathways, and in particular the GRESB pathways. And next slide. Thank you. So the GRESB pathways have been developed in Europe. They are funded by the EU, and the pathways have been set at a country level, but also at an asset type level. So there is a pathway for Korea, for Japan, for Hong Kong, China, Australia, etc. And you can see them here on this slide. These are all the pathways moving from where we currently are to net zero, and you can see each country trending towards that point, so becoming less carbon intensive over time. Now the scale is a little bit small, and I probably should have in hindsight explored that, but it's very much moving from 2020, 2021 where we are now to 2050 as the end goal, and that's what we mean by decarbonisation pathway. So these pathways, next slide please. So these pathways, and this is just an individual example pathway. These pathways are, like I said, for each country and are for each asset type. And they've been developed by GRESB, working back from the contribution that each country and each the real estate sector within each country has towards meeting the Paris-aligned goals. So it's very much a science-based pathway. Okay, not to be confused, not suggesting that science-based targets are wrong, but it's the language I try and use here is that these are very much science-based based pathways. So it's not the same, but they're obviously similar. So as you can see here, this is a pathway. This is a reduction curve in carbon. Very, very simple. Next slide, please. So then you map on your asset performance. So I've just plotted it on roughly here, say for 2021, what is your current greenhouse gas intensity? So, and that the CREM tool, which is an Excel tool, allows you to have access to, will help you sort of plot that on. Next slide, please. So then you can see that as the years go by, so say 2023, and your asset remains the same, it's not changed its efficiency with regards to carbon, it's getting closer to that pathway. So everything that is under the pathway is considered to be on the journey to net zero, okay? Because you're below that pathway, and that's the pathway that the country and the asset has to follow in order to hit 2050. So next slide, please. So in order to stay under that pathway, there'll need to be a retrofit, there'll need to be an improvement, there'll need to be some kind of measures that bring the greenhouse gas intensity down below the pathway again. Otherwise, there'll be a point where your asset is performing above the pathways, and we always want to stay below the pathways. So again, that could be a retrofit, or that could be some renewable energy. And next slide, please. So this next slide is straight from the CREM documentation, and is really trying to, it sort of shows in I guess a more academic form than what I was trying to display previously. And then as you go further, you'll see the blue area. The blue area is effectively the emissions that you are above the pathway, okay? And obviously the goal would always be to be below, but this shows how much you would be above a pathway. And potentially, if your government starts to put in regulations around these kind of pathways, you may have to pay a tax, you may have to pay some sort of cost towards the amount of carbon that you are above a pathway. And that is a risk that we see going forward. Obviously, we are still at the point where a lot of countries have not made those kind of statements, but it's something that at APG we're acutely aware of. So that's the sort of CREM pathways. That's the pathways that we're following at APG. Next slide, please. So I think we may have missed one, but it's okay. So yeah, in summary, okay, you've gone back, thank you. So pathways for EU countries are complete. Pathways for non-EU countries are in draft form, but are have been tested, are being piloted, and are going through a process of refinement. The tool is available free from the website. It's Excel based, so anybody can use it. And if you do have any questions about the CREM tool, the CREM pathways, please reach out to me directly. I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. Next slide. Thank you. So in summary, a little bit again about APG's targets, our plans to align with the SDGs, the 40% reduction in our carbon footprint for our investments. Obviously, being able to do that, or in order to do that, we need very much the energy data, and that's connected with the green building certifications. Getting certified third-party energy data is very important. Investing in circular economy is also important for us. And then again, applying this net zero framework. So think about it as being first from off at portfolio level, a commitment and action plan with a target of net zero, but steps on the way to achieve that. Use of TCFD and targets and monitoring. A focus at asset level. So in fact, part of the framework is explicit about the percentage of investments that are either aligned or under a pathway, in our case, CREM, and then engagements to improve. So improvements would be things like retrofits, so more renewable energy for an asset. And then the final one is around external communications, public policies, external engagement, and just being an advocate for change within the sector. Next slide, please. So that's the end of my presentation. And like I said, please reach out to me if you've got any questions about APG. You're welcome to ask them within this presentation too, or within the CREM pathways. Thank you.
John, thank you very much for your sharing there. And as mentioned, John will be here. Please, anyone, if you'd like to submit any questions through the Q&A function, please do that now, and we can pick up on those questions when we get to the panel session later on. In the meantime, we'll hear from Eric Landry from GRESB, who's the climate change specialist and who will build on some of the points that John's just made. Eric, over to you. Please introduce a little about yourself first. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. While my video gets started up, my name is Eric Landry. I am the climate change specialist at GRESB. And so I'm responsible for the content behind our research products and partnerships with regard to climate-related risk, both on the transition side and the physical side, as well as resilience and our carbon accounting methodologies. Before joining GRESB about a year ago, I was leading a working group at MIT in which we were basically providing a common ground, a common set of information for what climate modeling means and how that can be translated into appropriate scenario analysis in the terms of the TCFD or the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So today I'm going to be talking, if we could just move to the next slide for a second, or the next one. So first I'll be going over who is GRESB and what do we do, our relationship to ESG benchmarking, our relationship to the TCFD, again, our interaction with the CREM project, the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor, and then finally talking a little bit more about CREM and how it can be used for providing kind of quality alignment with a net zero ambitions in the real estate sector. So essentially, GRESB was born out of the need for kind of standardized and quality ESG data in the real estate sector. So we sit between fund managers and institutional investors. And essentially every year we go ahead and provide an assessment to the fund managers of real estate portfolios, in which we go ahead and collect their ESG data, we validate it, we score it, we benchmark it, and we provide those analytics back to the fund managers themselves and then forward on to the institutional investors. So this creates a kind of common language that the institutional investors and fund managers can then use to engage with each other and understand what the material aspects of their businesses are. Next slide, please. So again, what do we do with that data? Why do they join this network? Why do they join GRESB as the platform? Again, it's because of this sequence of validation. So validation of the data, both through automated checks and then also through manual validation as well. We have very transparent and objective scoring, and all of it's online. You can actually go onto our website and find exactly how we score everything, and all of the complete assessment there ready to look at. And then finally, we go ahead and benchmark against your peers. So you know exactly how you're performing against specific building types in your region, so that's most relevant for you to see how best practices are being performed in your portfolio and in your industry. Next slide, please. These are just a few of our over 120 investor members, both on the institutional and financial side, representing assets under management of over 28 trillion in USD. But this is just again emphasizing who some of the stakeholders in our network are. Next slide, please. So the assessment that we provide every year is broken down, at least on the real estate side, because we also cover infrastructure asset and infrastructure fund as well. But on the real estate side, our assessment is broken down into three components: management, performance, and development. And this covers all areas of E, S, and G of ESG, so both environmental, social, and governance metrics. And I just want to point out that in the performance component, you can see there's broken down into aspects. And this last year in 2020 was the first year where we actually mandated that all of the fund managers reporting to us on a yearly basis would have to provide asset level data on all of the assets in their portfolio. So this asset level data consists of energy data, waste data, greenhouse gas, water, building certifications, and other data and monitoring asset level data. And so what this does is this amounts to quite a large data set that we can then provide broken down analytics on. And this currently is above 96,000 individual real estate assets that are in our database that you can be benchmarked against. Next slide. So what does the output actually look like? Well, you'll get a benchmark report. And so you can see, this is an example that Kilroy Realty from the United States has let us use as an example. Of course, they're quite proud of their rankings and their benchmarking. So you can see kind of up at the top, they have their kind of peer benchmark score as well as their GRESB rating on the right. And then as you can see, there's a variety of different rankings according to how they perform against different benchmarks. So whether it's the office sector within the Americas or within the Americas, any sector, or within offices for global, or whatever the benchmark may be, you can see how they perform against those. Next slide. This again is just a quick explanation of the GRESB model. And essentially you can see basically a mapping of, on the y-axis, you can see how they did in the management component. And on the x-axis, you can see how they did against the performance component in terms of percentile against their peers. They're up there in the top right, which is a very good sign. And you can see that those diagonally slanting lines across the graph represent quintiles. And so those will be translated into the 5-star GRESB rating, depending on what quintile you're in. Along the bottom, you can also see how we've broken down their overall score into the E, S, and G pillars. So how do they do against the maximum amount of points they could have gotten within the environmental, the social, and governance aspects of our assessment. So it is quite an extensive assessment, but we feel it gives a standardized and quality view of how your portfolio is doing against the most important and material ESG issues on today. Next slide, please. So starting in 2020, we've integrated, so actually over the past 3 years, we've had an optional resilience module that we have now integrated for the 2021 assessment into the core assessment. So this will be part of the regular assessment now. And essentially, it allowed us to align completely with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures and the recommendations therein. So you can see how different aspects of, and again, there are a variety of indicators that go ahead and describe these aspects, but this is just at the aspect level for now. Essentially, you can see how the different GRESB aspects map onto the 4 pillars of the TCFD. So governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. It's not a one-to-one mapping. It's it's mixed in there where it's most appropriate. But not only do we cover just broadly the 4 pillars of the TCFD, but actually we're aligned with the 11 recommended disclosures that are spread out across those 4 pillars. So an even a greater level of alignment than just simply aligning with the 4-pillar stage. And so next we'll start talking about GRESB and CREM. So as Jonathan had just described, CREM is a project that was originally funded by the EU, but has since grown globally to go ahead and basically conceptualize and the kind of high level carbon budget targets associated with the Paris temperature targets, and to go ahead and downscale those in a science-based fashion so that you come up with decarbonization pathways that are specific to your region and specific to your building type. So you see some of the characteristics here, science-based, based on a sectoral decarbonization approach. You can see it's actually global coverage now. So actually the pathways are available for the entire, most of the developed real estate market globally. So those pathways are available. They came out last year. Albeit the tool is still limited to the EU. Again, one of the key points is that it's region specific and property type specific. So you can know exactly what your, say, hospital in South Korea should align to. And we'll see an example of that in a second. And then also they have both 2 degree Celsius pathways and 1.5 Celsius degree pathways. So just one click more. And these pathways can be used for risk assessment in terms of, insofar as if you want to know how you'll fare if your specific region goes ahead and starts setting regulation in lines with these pathways, when you might be at risk of stranding or obsolescence or kind of regulatory action. It can be used for Paris alignment. It can be used for target setting. And then finally, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, it can be used for net zero commitments as well and following them. And so here on the right, you'll actually see the GRESB decarbonization pathways for South Korea. And these are the 1.5 degree pathways, not the 2C ones. But you can see how they're broken down by the type of property that they're actually describing. So you wouldn't expect that, let's say here, the orange, lodging, leisure, and recreation should necessarily be, it's starting from a higher greenhouse gas intensity than, say, industrial distribution warehouses. Industrial distribution warehouses actually, they'll necessarily use a lot less energy. So while they start to converge, they don't actually end up at the same point, although it may look like it from here by 2050. And so this really gives kind of this science-based methodology for making sure that your specific property type in your specific region is being kind of assessed fairly against what it should be able to contribute to net zero commitments. Next slide, please. And then finally, and again, Jonathan had given one example of a framework that uses GRESB as best practice. So that's the, and that kind of body of investors, he was talking about the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, has put out this net zero investment framework and its implementation guide. And they go ahead and say they assess assets using the GRESB tool to determine alignment with a 1.5 degree pathway. So again, and the underlying pathways regarding the property type. So that's best practice for the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change. GRESB is also used as best practice in the inaugural 2025 target setting protocol put out by the UN convened Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. And in there they say includes both, this is for the real estate sector only, includes both landlord-controlled and tenant-controlled areas in line with the overall sub-portfolio target or carbon risk real estate monitor 1.5 degree C national pathways. So GRESB is being used widely and being accepted widely as best practice in terms of fulfilling net zero commitments. Of course, it's not the only kind of effort that's needed to comply with these overarching frameworks. Of course, these frameworks are more expensive than that, but GRESB is kind of held up as the standard of evidence for aligning with them in the real estate sector. I'll leave that there for now. And let some of our other presenters go ahead and speak, but it's been a pleasure.
Actually, Eric, I thank you very much for your sharing just now. So we've got one question which I think it would be great if we can pick up just before we go to the panel. So the questions come in, it says, where can I get the data source of GRESB South Korean 1.5 degree C pathway? So the image that you shared, and I have to say that when I saw that when we were doing the presentation, that's the first time I'd seen the South Korean pathway, so I found that quite exciting, and I'd also like to know where to get the data from.
Absolutely. So if you go to crem.org, so that's CRREM.org, you can find them there. They're actually freely accessible in an Excel format. And you can have the decarbonization pathways broken down by sector for commercial real estate and residential real estate over the large majority of advanced global real estate markets. So United States, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and then again, of course, all across the EU. And so, yeah, you can definitely find them there. Thank you.
And just to, sorry, it's John here, just to add, there's also a very useful document that explains how to use the non-EU pathways with the tool as well. So I recommend, I think you just have to provide your email address and then you can have access to both the Excel and there's a very useful PDF document that gives you lots of background information as well.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, both of you. So now if we move forward, we can hear a slightly different and very Asian perspective from Yunmi. So if you'd also like to just share a little about yourself and your role before proceeding. Over to you, Yunmi.
Sure. I think I'm just starting my video. Sorry. Hi, nice meeting you. 안녕하세요, 반갑습니다. So nice meeting you, and thank you, GRESB and ERM team, for having me today. Can you hear me well? Okay, I'll take it as yes. So my name is Yunmi, and I'm currently working at the Sustainable Finance team at OCBC Bank. So OCBC Bank is one of the largest regional bank headquartered in Singapore. So I guess perhaps less developed than the European peers such as APG, but we're also starting a journey of integrating sustainability in the way we do business. Sorry. And as a connector of capital, our prime focus is to bring capital into projects and companies that are currently directly contributing to sustainable development or supporting corporate sustainability efforts through our banking products. So last year we announced that last year we announced our ambitious targets of increasing our sustainable finance assets to 25 billion Sing dollar by 2025. And to make sure that it happens, the bank has created a team, sustainable finance team, where I'm from, to work with our clients on all the sustainable finance activities. So where I'm from, like a deal advisory team, helping really helping clients with the green loans and green bonds and sustainability-linked loans. Moving on to the next slide. So today I'm moving on to the next slide, please. Right. So today I'm here to share my observation and the bank's practices on how property sectors are adopting sustainable finance practices. So when it comes to buildings, as John and Eric alluded, we need to think about how to protect them and their values from numerous events derived from the climate change, and making sure that your buildings is in line with indeed the climate transition pathway. But at the same time, they're also culprit of the climate change. Although they're just a medium, they also use electricity and water and produce waste. And often the case, the environmental footprint of the people within the building is determined by how the building was designed and how the building is maintained and managed. So it really depends on the sources of its energy and efficiency of the buildings, and even the recycling practices of the building management firms. So it is important to make our buildings and its management practice smart and sustainable. With increasing urbanization, we expect a lot more buildings on Earth, and especially in this region, so making buildings more important in addressing climate change. And our efforts in making the buildings more smart and sustainable will ultimately help us reduce the impacts of the climate change that may threaten the values of the buildings as well. So as a commercial bank that typically offers a corporate loan with a definitive timeline, the financial impact of climate change in building sector has been less obvious. And at this moment, banks are typically focusing on the right side. So on the left side, we are currently working on initiatives such as TCFD. OCBC is also a supporter of the TCFD initiative, really trying to understand and assess the climate change on our loan book. However, I would say this is, we're taking quite an initial step. And as we continue to develop our practice, we'll have a clearer view, and I'll perhaps be able to share more in detail in coming years on the left side. Today, I'm gonna speak a little bit about the right side. We call it as sustainable finance practice. Moving on to the next slide. Right. So sustainable finance from the banking sector, there are roughly two different types of products depending on the objective that you're trying to achieve through these products. The one that you see on the right side, left side, sorry, it's products that are designed to bring capitals to green or social projects. We call it as a green loan or green bonds. They are exactly the same with conventional bond or loan. The only difference is the company, the borrower or the issuer are making public statements that the proceeds from this debt instruments will be only used to finance this predefined green or social projects. So in building sector, a lot of companies are entering into green loan or green bonds to finance or refinance their green buildings that has a green building certification, or to invest in retrofit projects. On the right side, we have products that are designed to incentivize better behavior, better sustainability performance. So we call it as sustainability linked loan or sustainability linked bond. Again, it's same with the conventional loan or bond. The only difference is we identify the sustainability performance indicators of the companies, and then we agree to link it to the funding cost. So it can link it to the interest rate margin for the loan case, and it can link it to the coupon rate of the bond case. So many companies are entering into sustainable finance, not necessarily because it's cheaper or there is a very financial tangible benefits immediately. A lot of companies are seeing this as an opportunity to really articulate their commitment on sustainability by really linking their funding program with their sustainability agenda. Moving on to the next slide. So these two charts show the growth of sustainable bond and loan market globally. So as you know, as you may know, actually, sustainable finance from the banking sector has started from the green bonds roughly 10 years ago from Europe. But now, as you can see here, it has become a really global product with a full diversification in terms of issuer type, countries where the bond is coming from, the currency, and the project that is financing. And we do expect that it will continue to grow. The bottom chart shows the sustainable loan transactions. A lot of it is non-private, so we are just gathering the publicly available data only. But as you can see also, it's growing very fast. Sustainable loan was created leveraging on the good success of the bond practice. So it took off quite quickly, but it's still a new market. But it has been really popular because if you think about it, corporate loans are really for any corporates, irrespective of the size and the sector where you are in. So we see a lot more interest from our clients, from all sector, all market, and from all size. Moving on to the next slide. And when we think about the sustainable finance, I think the first reaction I always hear is, oh, it's a European thing, it's a North American thing. It may come later to Asia, but through this slide, I just want to articulate that Asia has been really a strong driver behind this growth. As you can see here, roughly 20% of the green bond has come from this region. And as John mentioned, although it's a very initial steps, many Asian governments, including Korean governments, has announced an ambitious target of carbon neutrality. And sustainable finance is really well positioned to support these efforts. Moving on to the next slide. Then moving to the property sector. Thanks to well-developed and widely adopted green building certification, such as LEED and BCA Green Marks or BREEAM, and the rating system such as GRESB, the building sector has been really driving the growth of sustainable finance market, especially in Asia. As you can see here on the chart, on the top left chart, around 60% of the sustainable loan was given to the property players. And the logos that you see on the right side, these are some of the select clients that OCBC has offered sustainable finance, either loan or bonds, in the last 2 years. And this is really the list of the clients. The bottom chart shows the breakdown between the green loan and the sustainability linked loan. As you can see at the beginning, green loan was more a popular choice. I would say it's more a natural choice because property sector tends to have a big building that has a green building certification. So it was kind of a natural thing to start. But recently, we see really a balanced interest from the clients on green loan and then green financing or sustainability linked financing. And we're also observing a very strong adoption of the GRESB rating among the clients that we are speaking to. And I think this is also a reason why we see a lot more interest in the sustainability linked transaction as well, because GRESB rating system can be also used for the sustainability linked loan transactions. Moving on to the next slide. Yeah. Before I finish, I wanted to share some of the live cases on how your peers are exploring sustainable finance. The most typical and traditional approach is to finance or refinance green buildings through green loan and green bonds, as I mentioned before. And it does include the construction loan as well. So in this case, we use the nationally or internationally recognized green buildings certification. I believe in Korea, LEED is the most popular one. So we recently offered a green loan to Maple Tree Logistics to refinance their green buildings that has a BCA Green Market certification. And also they had a very strong ambition of implementing solar panels on their logistics center. So with the green loan, they will also finance those solar panels as well. We're also the first bank offering the green property loan in Korea, thanks to this loan with the MNG, as you can see on the right side. We also, and lastly, Ascenda REITs has successfully, Ascenda REITs is a part of the Capital Land Group, and they have a lot of a logistics center in Singapore and globally as well. And they issue us the first green loan last year, and it was really successful. And when they issue another one in a few weeks later, they decide to do again. So the second one was a green perp, which was again a very successful achievement in terms of the cost, the rating the coupon rate that they achieved as well. Moving on to the next one. So when you have one building with the green building certification, I guess it's easy because you have one building that's like few hundred million green loan, green bonds. But some companies do not have that. Some companies have like hundreds of a portfolio of 100 buildings, and not everything has a green building certification. So some companies like Fraser's Logistics and Fraser Property Australia has used the GRESB STAS system in their green financing. So I thought that it's an interesting case study for you to see. So both companies, together with OCBC, has set up a green finance framework recognizing, recognizing a portfolio with 5 stars as a green project. So we supported that because the GRESB 5 stars really is given to the top 20% performers vis-a-vis their peers and in the market as well. Moving on to the next one. Yeah, so really lastly, as mentioned, sustainability linked loan is gaining traction. And roughly there are 2 different approaches in setting KPIs. You can use the third-party ESG ratings, such as GRESB in the property sector, or you can use very specific KPIs. So the case that you see on the left side, Linkrate, which is a Hong Kong company, has done a sustainability linked loan with us. They use the numeric scoring system from the GRESB as a target for target setting. But for some companies, they either don't participate in GRESB rating system yet, or their score is so high, so they don't feel that they can continue to improve meaningfully during the life of the loan. In that case, we also look at the specific KPIs. The popular KPIs are like energy intensity, obviously greenhouse gas emission, energy intensity, water intensity of the buildings that they own and manage. Moving on to the next slide, this is really the last slide. This is just a quick snapshot of how we are doing, how the OCBC is doing in this region to show our credibility. Really, our key message today is adopting GRESB and more ESG monitoring and reporting can actually be burdensome in terms of operation and resources. But it's the right thing to do, and we absolutely support your efforts in doing that. So banks such as OCBC really recognize your efforts in this, and we're trying to offer bespoke financing solutions to really help you along the way, making sure that you feel supported and you get actually you are incentivized to do better and to really in this journey as well. So I believe this is how we indirectly contribute to sustainable development of the society that we're in. So really, this is all I prepared today. Hope you find it useful and informative. Over to you, Ben.
Sure. Thank you very much, Yumi. And just before we move on, of course, you were saying that OCBC as a bank wants to support real estate organizations in their journey. But how would you say the subscription rates for bond offerings that are issued? I mean, are they coming in also quite high? So it's not just yourselves, it's the underlying investors as well. Do you have any metrics you can share there?
Right. To be honest with you, I mean, in the, okay, I think investors, I'm sure Jonathan perhaps can say more, but investors are really integrating ESG. And then the first way, I think the easy way for them to do is to really support the green bond market. Because as I briefly mentioned, green bond is not really different from normal bonds in terms of financial terms or legal terms. So they don't have to change any like very material investment strategy in investing in that. While they have a very strong, they have a transparency on what they are investing in, where the money goes, and also they can actually understand the potentially environmental impact of the bonds that they invest as well. So I do see a lot of strong interest from the investors. So that's why I think the green bond from the A-REITs has been so successful in terms of the investor attraction. There is no real, like, I wouldn't say like, oh, if you issue green bonds, you can get 2 pips off. Like, I don't think I can say that to be really honest with you. However, we do really see a strong interest and support from the investor base, including the ones in Asia.
Okay.
Hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. So let's now move to Claire, CEO. It's good to hear from you again. Claire, and perhaps you can help our audience make sense of some of these global and Asia trends and ground them a bit more in the Korean experience.
Okay. Okay, now I change my language to Korean so that the audience is actually the webinar. The purpose of this webinar today is to target Korea audiences especially and to let them know the global cases. And then the message, I hope the messages are very well received. So I changed my language from English to Korean now. So I hope English speaking audiences can follow my slides in English. 네, 그래서 지금까지 얘기한 거는 이제 APG 펜션 펀드하고 OCBC 이제 아시아 케이스에서 ESG 인테그레이션을 Sustainable Finance 영역에서 어떻게 실행을 하고 있는지를 보여드렸어요. 네, 이제 한 가지 제가 딱 떠오르는 생각은 APG는 사실 글로벌 탑 5 다섯 번째 큰 연기금이고 MPS는 글로벌 탑 3에 드는 그 3위를 하는 그런 연기금인데 그런데 비해서 이제 한국이 굉장히 아직 이제 어드밴스하지 못했다라는 생각이 좀 많이 들었습니다. 그리고 앞에서 APG에서 그 쉐어한 케이스는 전형적으로 오늘은 이제 리얼 에셋에 포커스했기 때문에 그 TCFD를 어떻게 인테그레이션 하고 있는지에 대한 그런 부분들의 내용들이 잘 묻어났다고 생각이 되고요. 그리고 그 OCBC 케이스는 제가 앞서서 오프닝할 때 말씀드린 것처럼 이 Sustainable Finance라는 것이 사실 유러피언들의 플레이만 아니라는 거, 아시아 쪽으로 이미 많이 이제 많이 넘어왔다. 그리고 아시아에서도 굉장히 이렇게 액티브하게 인테그레이션을 하고 있는 케이스로 한국 이제 어디언스들에게 이렇게 좀 벤치마킹 케이스가 되었으면 하는 바람입니다. 그래서 오늘 리얼에셋 인베스터들이 특히 한국 기관들이 앞으로 어떻게 어프로치를 하면 좋을지에 대해서 간단하게 정리를 하려고 합니다. 네, next page, please. 오케이. 그래서 이제 Sustainable Finance에서 ERM이 어떤 역할을 하는지 제가 1분만 설명드리고 진행을 하겠습니다. Next page, please. Next, please. 예, 저희 ERM은 일단 이제 뭐 많은 분들이 알고 계시지만은 글로벌 50년의 그 역사를 가지고 있고 40개국 이상에서 이제 ESG 컨설팅 서비스를 하는 그런 기관입니다. 그래서 글로벌 시장에서 글로벌 플레이어들에게 이런 서스테이너블 파이낸스 영역뿐만 아니라 이런 지금 현재 그 ESG로 통칭되고 있는 그런 서스테이너빌리티 아젠다에 대해서 전체적인 글로벌 이니셔티브들과 함께 프레임워크를 잡아온 그런 기관으로 이해를 하시면 될 것 같습니다. Next page. 이 Sustainable Finance라는 게 유럽에서 작년에 사실 유럽 시장에서 오랫동안 20년 동안 진행이 되어 왔었지만은 작년에 EU 텍사노미가 들어오면서 2020년 6월에 그게 굉장히 규제화가 되면서 또 가속화가 됐다고 생각을 하는데요. 그 근간에 있었던 이제 글로벌 이니셔티브들 그런 국제적인 프레임워크 작업들에 있어서 사실 ERM이 계속 같이 디벨롭을 해왔다라는 점을 강조드리고 싶고요. 그래서 ERM이 파이낸스 섹터 엑스퍼티즈를 가지고 있다라는 점을 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 그래서 Shaping Global Landscape Together이라고 말씀을 드릴 수 있을 것 같은데 지금 글로벌 인베스터들이 Sustainable Finance 아젠다에서 대해서 얘기를 할 때 빠질 수 없는 그런 PRI라던가 뭐 Infrastructure Investment의 그 카본 이코노미에 대해서 로우 카본 이코노미에 대해서 얘기를 할 때 그 쓰는 Climate Wise Transition Risk Framework이라던가 아니면은 이 TCFD는 사실 코퍼레이트와 인베스터들이 모두 인테그레이션을 해야 되는 그런 기후 변화의 리스크를 재무제표로 나타내는 파이낸셜 디스클로저하는 그냥 글로벌 프레임워크라고 보시면 되는데요. 이런 TCFD 그리고 SDG 섹터 로드맵 그리고 은행권의 ESG 툴 중에 하나인 Equator Principle 여기 들어가는 모든 ESG에 대한 그런 이제 프레임워크 그 리뷰어로 저희가 컨설팅 업체를 참여해서 같이 디벨롭을 해왔다. 그래서 글로벌 서스테이너블 파이낸스의 아젠다와 그 랜드스케이프에 대해서 잘 이해를 하고 있다는 점을 말씀드리고 싶습니다. Next page, please. Next, please. Yeah. 그래서 이 부분은 지금 앞서서 제가 비기닝을 할 때 말씀을 드렸는데요. 지금 일단은 이 ESG라는 거는 지금 저희가 최근에 한국 인베스터들을 뭐 코퍼레이트 인베스터 뭐 무관하게 많은 문의를 주고 계시지만 특히나 이제 인베스터들이 계속 문의를 하시는 거는 ESG 프레임워크를 잡고 싶다, ESG 팔러시를 세우고 싶다 이런 문의를 굉장히 많이 받고 있어요. 그래서 그 서스테이너블 파이낸스에 대해서 글로벌 시장에서 또 비즈니스를 하시면서 직접적으로 정말 많이 느끼시는 것 같은데 이 ESG라는 거는 템포러리한 게 아니라 파이낸스 영역에서 이제 새로운 놈이 되어 있다. 근데 그 근간에는 이제 투자자들과 에셋 오너, 그다음에 정부의 레귤레이션 이 모든 이제 인풋이 동시에 들어오고 규제화가 되고 있기 때문에 이거는 뭐 일시적인 것이 아니라 방향을 바꿀 수 없는 그런 트렌드다, inevitable하다라고 제가 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다. Next page, please. 지금 한국 시장에 ESG가 굉장히 스트롱하게 이렇게 웨이브로 작년 말부터 와 있는 상황인데 그 Sustainable Finance에서 일단 이제 그 촉발 시발점이 된 그 레귤레이션이 EU 텍사노미라고 할 수 있을 것 같은데요. 2020년 6월에 일단 이게 이제 수면에 드러났고 지금 여기 적혀 있는 Climate Change Mitigation Adaptation부터 해서 6가지 Environmental Objective하고 그다음에 Minimum Social Safeguard 같은 것들이 이제 규제와 프레임워크로 잡혀 있죠. 그래서 유럽 EU 지역에서 비즈니스를 하는 코퍼레이트들도 이런 영역들을 다 서포트할 수밖에 없게끔 이렇게 비즈니스를 해야 하고 그다음에 그 기업들이 비즈니스를 하는 데 있어서 캐피탈 플로우 자체도 이것들을 서포트하는 방향으로 가야 된다. 그래서 Sustainable Finance의 무브가 온 거죠. 예, next page please. 그래서 이 EU 텍사노미를 근간으로 해서 2020년에 발족이 됐고 2021년, 22년부터 해서 이제 액티베이트가 된다, 실효성을 가지게 된다라는 게 지금 유럽의 흐름이고요. 그리고 ESG 디스클로즈 같은 것들이 다 규제화되고 있고 non-financial 데이터를 다 디스클로즈 해야 되고 이런 것들을 통해서 지금 한국에서도 K 텍사노미를 논의를 하고 있고 FSC에서 2025년부터 한국판 이제 이 텍사노미를 셋업을 해서 모든 기업과 투자자들에게 ESG 관련된 활동을 디스클로즈 하게끔 하고 있다. 이것들이 전체적인 흐름이다. 말씀드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다. Next page please. 그래서 이제 트랜스페런트하게 공시하는 것이 중요하다. ESG 활동에 대해서 스테이크홀더들하고 다 커뮤니케이션 하셔야 된다. 그래서 이게 제가 지금 오프닝에 보여드렸던 장표인데요. 그래서 뭐 유럽 지역의 EU 텍사노미, 프랑스의 Finance for Tomorrow, 브라질의 Innovation Lab for Climate Finance, 그리고 중국의 지금 Climate Finance Committee, 그러니까 모든 지금 국가들의 이런 이제 Sustainable Finance를 향한 특히 이제 Climate Change가 Priority가 돼서 실행하게끔 하는 글로벌, 그러니까 Public과 Private Sector의 같이 진행하는 그런 이니셔티브들이 각각 진행 중이다. 그리고 한국에서도 K 텍사노미가 이루어지고 있고 그래서 이거는 글로벌 아젠다다. 그리고 유러피언 플레이어들뿐만 아니라 아시아 쪽으로도 굉장히 스트롱하게 웨이브가 넘어오고 있다는 것을 말씀드리고 싶습니다. Next page, please. 요 ESG 중에서도 사실 climate change가 이제 finance 섹터의 priority인데요. 지금 이제 미국이나 유럽이나 어느 정도 이 부분이 인테그레이션이 어드밴스된 나라에서는 지금 이제 소셜 이슈들이 많이 드러나고 있지만은 지금 한국 인베스터들은 지금 이 부분을 먼저 실행을 해야 되는 그런 상황이라고 말씀드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다. Next page. 그래서 이 파이낸스 그 저기 금융기관들 그리고 이건 코퍼레이트 파이낸스에 동시에 해당되는 건데 이 TCFD가 클라이밋 체인지에 대해서 어떻게 대응을 하고 있는지 그 부분을 디스클로즈하기 위한 국제적인 공통의 그런 프레임워크라고 말씀드릴 수 있을 것 같고요. Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosure이죠. 그래서 4가지 필라에 따라서 어떠한 가버넌스를 가지고 그 조직에서 어떠한 스트래티지를 가지고 리스크 매니지먼트를 하면서 어떠한 로드맵을 가지고 지금 이 그 클라이밋 체인지에 대응을 하고 있냐를 보여주는 그런 지표인데요. 그래서 앞서서 말씀드린 그 APG에서 뭐 40%의 자산이 뭐 이제 그 클라이밋 리스크에 대해 대응을 해야 되고 그다음에 그린 빌딩에 대해 투자하는 그런 그린 빌딩 서티피케이트 그 양이 뭐 더블링이 돼야 되고 이런 식으로 이제 구체적인 수치화해서 클라이밋 체인지 에너지 에피션시를 나타내는 것 그런 것들을 이제 TCFD의 하나하나 부분이라고 말씀드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다. 그래서 이거는 모든 기업들과 그리고 모든 투자자들이 앞으로 해야 되는 그런 의무적인 레귤레이션입니다. Next page, please. 네, 그래서 지금 이제 한국에서는 이제 서스테이너블 파이낸스에 대해서 피할 수 없구나라고 느끼기 시작한 것 같고, 그 다음에 그걸 인테그레이션 하는 데 있어서 TCFD에 대한 그 개념에 대해서 이제 막 이해를 하고 있는 것 같습니다. 그래서 코퍼레이트 쪽에서도 사실 아직 TCFD에 대해서 정확하게 로드맵을 가지고 구체화한 기관이 많지가 않지만은 금융기관들도 이제 막 시작하는 상황이라고 생각이 되고요. 근데 저희 ERM이 사실 글로벌 시장에서 글로벌 투자자들하고는 이렇게 오랫동안 이 TCFD에 대한 프로젝트를 많이 상당히 진행을 해왔다라는 점을 간단하게 공유를 드리고 싶습니다. Next page, please. 네, 그래서 지금 오늘 참석하신 이 어디언스들이 이제 리얼 에셋 인베스터들이 많으신데요. 그래서 인베스터들이 그래서 어떻게 어프로치를 해야 되냐, ESG 인테그레이션을 위해서 where to start 그 부분에 대해서 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 먼저 이제 투자자들이 다양한 에셋 클래스를 가지고 있으실 텐데요. 오늘 참석하신 분들은 대부분 이제 리얼 에셋 인베스터라고 알고 있습니다. 근데 이 ESG 인테그레이션의 궁극적인 목적은 실효성은 access to capital, return on investment, 그리고 reputation, risk management 이 네 가지로 말씀을 드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다. 그래서 궁극적으로는 모든 인베스터들이 모든 그 조직적으로 ESG 스트래티지를 가지고 있어야 되고 그다음에 투자하는 인베스트먼트에다가 이 KPI를 가지고 ESG KPI를 셋업을 해야 되고요. 그리고 포트폴리오 관리 자체도 ESG 기준으로 평가를 해야 되고 그리고 이러한 활동들을 스테이크홀더들하고 디스클로즈해서 커뮤니케이션을 해야 됩니다. 이런 이제 사실 오퍼레이션 단위라고 볼 수 있는데 이 투자의 각각의 프로세스에서 ESG를 어떻게 인테그레이션 하는지를 가지고 있어야 되죠. 그래서 이 ESG 프레임워크를 내부적으로 가지고 있어야 되고 그리고 그 상단에는 그 기업만의 RI 팔리시가 있어야 되겠죠. Responsible 인베스트먼트 팔리시가 있어야 되고요. 그래서 이러한 것들 체제 안에서 그 다음은 이제 그 인베스터가 운용하는 에셋 클래스가 어떻게 되느냐. 종합자산 운용사라면은 사실 뭐 주식 채권부터 시작해서 대체 투자 영역까지 있다면은 사실 그 투자의 대상이 코퍼레이트과 리얼 에셋과 이렇게 믹스되어 있으니까 그럴 경우에는 코퍼레이트에 대해서 ESG에 대한 평가를 해야 되고요. 그것이 지금 이제 우리나라의 언론에서 많이 나오는 그런 스코링 시스템, 기업이 뭐 A다 B다 하는 거 그런 이제 이밸류에이션이 코퍼레이트 투자 대상에 대한 그런 스코링 시스템이라고 한다면 오늘의 우리의 논의의 그 아젠다의 초점인 리얼 에셋의 경우에는 인프라스트럭처라던가 아니면 프로퍼티 에셋이라던가 이런 경우에 국제적으로 가장 통용되는 그런 이제 스코어링, 벤치마킹 지수가 사실 GRESB라고 이해를 하시면 될 것 같아요. 근데 지금 아직 한국 시장에서는 사실 GRESB에 파티시페이팅 하고 있는 기관도 3군데 정도밖에 되지 않고 이게 아주 이제 초반의 시장으로 지금 이해를 하시면 될 것 같고요. 그 GRESB 안에서도 만약에 자산이 뭐 빌딩이 여러 개다, 프로퍼티가 여러 개다, 뭐 이러면 펀드 이렇게 포트폴리오 와이즈 어널리시스를 해야겠지만은 프로퍼티 하나 이렇게 GRESB 스코어 그 밑에 약간 이렇게 네로우 다운해서 접근할 수 있는 방법이 이제 그린 빌딩 서티피케이트라고 보시면 될 것 같은데요. 그래서 APG에서도 뭐 지금 2015년부터 25년까지 10년 동안 그린 빌딩 서티피케이트를 가진 그런 자산을 더블링 2배로 늘리겠다 뭐 이런 타겟이 있었잖아요. 그래서 에너지 이피션시를 보고 워터 컨섬션 보고 이런 식으로 이에 대해서 굉장히 인테그레이션 잘하고 있다는 걸 보여주는 그런 지표라고 보시면 될 것 같습니다. 그래서 오늘 참석하신 리얼 에셋 인베스터들은 이제 궁극적으로는 이런 형태의 ESG 팔리시와 프레임워크를 갖추셔야 하고 그다음에 가장 시작할 수 있는 the easiest way to start가 이제 GRESB에 대해서 아시는 거, 그다음에 그린 빌딩 서티피케이트를 받기 시작하시는 거라고 말씀을 드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다. 네. 그래서 여기서 제 세션을 마감하고 이제 Q&A에서 말씀을 드리겠고요. 그리고 한국에 있는 투자자들은 조금 더 구체적인 내용이 궁금하신 경우에는 이 GRESB 통해서 버추얼 로드쇼에 신청을 해주셔도 좋을 것 같고 그리고 저희 쪽으로 문의를 주셔도 좋을 것 같습니다. Yeah, I'll close my session, Ben, and I will back to you and for further questions.
Thank you very much for that sharing, Claire. I was able to follow through the slides, if not through the language. So I absolutely invite all attendees to share any questions through the Q&A function. We've got one already. So that's from Charles Scott to Jonathan and Yunmi. I'll read it out in case anybody can't see it. So the European Commission's Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, SFDR, a consideration of principal adverse impacts on sustainability factors is being discussed a lot among the financial institutions and investors. So what insights can you share on this and how are your organizations preparing? John, perhaps you can start with that.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a question that we get a lot. In fact, I'll just see. Let me know if, oh yeah, camera's working this time. So I guess I've got sort of two responses to this. One, we've already made our first disclosure. So that's available on APG's website. I won't read out the hyperlink because it's particularly long, but we have made a disclosure, and if you do want to see it, again, just contact me directly. I'm happy to send you a copy or point you in the right direction. So first off, we have made our first disclosure. The SFDR regulations, I think, have just came in, I think, a year ago, or maybe they're in draft form. But anyway, so we have begun our disclosure. You may be surprised to know that within APG, obviously responsible investment is very important to us, but we don't have any investment pools that are defined as being specifically as sustainable investment. So the way that we disclose what we're doing takes that in mind. So because SFDR asks you to basically to report on any funds that you define as being sustainable or any that promote environmental and social characteristics. So we only are reporting on the funds that we believe promote environmental and social characteristics, because that's how we define it ourselves. With regards to real estate, let me just, I can just bring out some highlights. We in our disclosure, we talk about our carbon reduction targets, climate risk, corporate governance policies and voting policies. We talk about UN Global Compact inclusion. I mean, I won't go through the whole thing, but yeah, we've already started doing it. And actually, what it has forced us to do is to bring together all the different policies, strategies, and approaches that we've got across the different asset classes into one kind of document. And actually, from my own kind of experience, it's been very useful to have a single place to read and to understand. So yeah, we're well on the way, and it's already having an impact in the way in which we report and disclose information.
Thank you, John. So Yunmi, is SFDR relevant for yourselves?
Right. I almost feel jealous about John at this moment. As a Singaporean bank with a majority of our operation in Asia, to be very honest with you, European regulations do not really directly affect the way we do our business. So as a sustainable finance person, it's something that we obviously closely monitor. But perhaps another way of addressing this question is, I think it's ultimately the question is how the bank is trying to understand and assess and report their ESG related risk on their financial portfolio that they own as well. And I think the way we are trying to address is, I would say that we're, as I briefly mentioned on the property sector, we're still taking baby steps in this at this time. And the TCFD has been the tool that we've been adopting and then trying to work around. I hope it somehow addresses. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much. So we don't currently have another audience question, but please do submit some from the Q&A. Oh, well, there we go. We'll go for that, and then I'll have my backup question. So when you expect IFRS will include sustainability standards in their protocol, any progress in this respect so far? So have any of you seen convergence between accounting standards and sustainability standards, I guess? If anybody can wave to let me know if you'd like to take that on. I have seen a working group being assembled somewhere, but I can't remember more than that.
Yeah, so the timeline consists of, so no. I think we're all in the dark here a bit. Okay, we're all in the dark. So I guess then for those who are interested in sort of SASB is, if anything, a little bit more accountancy oriented than and integrated report oriented than some of the other tools that we've been discussing today. CREM is a little bit more about how to align real estate or other types of assets with global CO2 standards. So that's not so much an accounting question though. So my question was going to be, we've talked about sort of some of what's almost at the cutting edge and the frontier, how to get the net zero targets, what are leading
European investor is asking for from its portfolio and its external mandate. What about those who are at the starting point? What are the sort of the easy first few steps? Claire, perhaps this is something that you're very often used to hearing from clients and could share a little bit more about that, but I'd open that to everybody.
Thank you, Ben. Actually, I just mentioned that when I closed my session, I mentioned that as a real estate investors, the easiest way is to learn about the GRESB score and then also learn about the green building certificate. So we see that just first, some of the frontier companies in Korea, they start to integrate in that way. However, it's not really, it's not really not much players yet. And then a lot of inquiries recently, but they're just watching who's gonna first, right? So, but I would say this is the way we need to go. So it's really inevitable. So I really recommend this is a great timing for investors to position themselves as a frontier with a great kind of a reputation wise, and then branding wise, is a great chance to differentiate themselves as a strong sustainable finance player.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I'll just go ahead and echo that. It's often said you can't manage what you don't measure. And so that's where Gres really sees itself as helping fund managers in the real estate space. By even filling out our assessment, you can learn a lot about where your data gaps are and how your peers are doing best practice in those areas and how you can proceed. And the score is just a proxy for kind of the overall effort that you might want to put into a certain area. But yeah, so the first step is really measurement, and Gres can help with that. And then the second thing is that, for those who are just starting and are a little hesitant because they don't want their Gres score to be shared with investors right off the bat because they're not sure how they'll do on the assessment. We do have a grace period of 1 year. So you are able to join GRESB, learn from the benchmarks, receive a benchmark report, go through the process of filling out the assessment, understand where your data gaps are. And for the first year, you can opt to not have those results shared with the investors at large. So you can kind of use it as a learning year, a trial year, in order to get a better understanding of how you might improve in the future.
Thank you. And Yunmi, I wonder if you can pick up on that question of where and how to start.
Right. I mean, I would echo what Eric and Claire says. I'm obviously not an expert in the property sector, to be very honest with you. And as a banker, I think what I can tell you is having a green building certification or GRESB rating is absolutely helpful in speaking in common language, because at least it's something that everybody is understanding to a certain degree. And then we can actually see numbers, we can see a progress in a way that we understand as a financier as well. So it's absolutely helpful tools.
John, same question for you.
Sure. I mean, I think just without sort of repeating what the other panelists have said, the key thing for us really is, or certainly the key advice that I would give is that Gres is it's more than just a sort of a reporting framework or a way of sort of measuring how you're doing. I would consider it more as a framework or a route to follow. Because so often, and I've been in a position before where you're being asked to, start an ESG journey, you're asked to put together a strategy. So often it's very difficult to know what to do or what's important. And I think having a framework like GRESB actually makes it very easy because it's already spelt out for you. You can already see what you need to do. You can already see what your peers are doing. So yeah, again, I'll be an absolute advocate of the best place to start would be GRESB. And it also helps that as you improve, you will start to find that you get much more engagement within your business and perhaps within the broader sector as you start to add, bit by bit by bit. I've been working with, or I'm working with companies that have been doing GRESB for 5, 6, 7, if not longer years, and you see the progress, you see the improvement. And from an institutional investor perspective like APG, improvement is what we want to see. You know, I've had lots of discussions with people who are at the very, very top end of the GRESB score. They're scoring like 90s, and they're worried because they've dropped 2 points. And I say to them, you know, like, we're less concerned at the top end about the points. It's more about the progression that you've made. It's the journey that you're on. So I would not be concerned about disclosing via GRESB and thinking, oh, we're going to have a low score, because any informed investor like APG will understand that that's the beginning and that's the journey. So, and in fact, the more you share, the easier it is for us to comment on where we think, or where our priorities are, where you could improve, and share that learning. So we very much see it as a tool to help you move forwards, but also a tool that helps me engage with the investments we've got and push for certain things.
So we just received another question, which essentially hopefully builds on what you're just sharing there, John, but asks about profitability. And whether there's an expectation to see more or less, by implication, profitability in sustainable asset portfolios. And it's like the question contrasts this question about profitability with risk management and compliance.
Yeah, John, shall I take that one up?
Please, yes, and you and me as well.
Yeah, it's. I mean, our view at APG is that, you know, ESG or non-financial, non-financial indicators are important in understanding the risk return of the whole investment. And I think sometimes it's very easy to get fixated on green buildings versus non-green buildings and the profitability and the returns. Certainly in Europe, you know, there are a number of academic studies that demonstrate that green buildings have, you know, higher rents, lower turnovers, and could be considered a better product, and, you know, in terms of their longevity and their profitability. I think we like to see it as very much as an overall holistic view, and that actually if a business is starting to consider climate risks, they're starting to consider their environmental liabilities and their social liabilities, that it just means they're probably a better managed business, because they're looking at all the externalities that are impacting their business. So if you have a good appreciation for all of the ESG aspects that impacts your asset or impacts your business, then you're more likely to have a better understanding of all the other issues, you know, that face you, you know, legal regulation or other sort of compliance related things. It just indicates that it's a better run business and therefore is more likely to be profitable. And also you have to remember that APG, we are about reputation and reputational management, and businesses that have a better ESG profile are usually lower risk for us, and that is again an important metric for us.
So I just want to mention we're coming to the end of the session. So Yunmi, if you can answer and also perhaps include a closing thought, and then I'll take closing thoughts from Eric and Claire before closing off the session.
Sure. I mean, I think John said all the right things about the ESG performance and then the potential long-term performance. Generally, our view is the companies with the good sustainability integration tend to have a long-term perspective. They try to really understand what's going on from a big picture in terms of industry and the market, and they are trying to better position themselves in the big transition. So in that sense, I think we see it as a company with potentially a better success, and also the company with a clearer sustainability journey and the long-term transition strategy tend to attract better talents, better partners, better investors, better financiers, et cetera, et cetera. So ultimately, they're just in the whole more positive ecosystem for their business efforts. So in that sense, from a very long-term perspective, we do expect better profitability from those business. And having said that, that is really why OCBC, commercial bank, we're service providers for the corporates. So for us, it's identifying the right corporates who will do better in 5 and 10 years' time, and deepening the relationship at the early stage is really the key success factor for our own business. And that is why we see that sustainability is a real business driver in terms of the banking strategy. And we are very happy to having started this journey, and we're happy to share our experiences with you guys today. Thanks.
Thank you. And if I can ask for succinct closing comments from Eric and Claire.
Well, first, thank you for helping put this together. I think this is a very important topic, and GRESB is here to help people at any stage of the journey. So our assessments are built not only for the leaders in the field, but also for those just starting their journey. And it's a hub for really anything ESG related in the real asset space. So, whether it's TCFD, whether it's SFDR, whether it's alignment with net zero, whether it's, alignment with IIGCC's net zero framework or the Asset Owners Alliance framework. GRESB can serve as the foundation of data, and it's getting better year after year. It's getting more granular and more flexible. So as we move towards, away from this sort of like, oh, just ESG in general, and, do you have a policy and do you have a process, and more towards kind of really performance-driven data, GRESB can serve as a very strong kind of platform for your, wherever you are in the journey currently.
Thank you. Claire?
Okay, I hope this session was not long but simple and very kind of straightforward guidelines for the career investors. Where they start, and then I hope the experience sharing from APG and OCBC was very helpful for them. And then for any further questions, I'm happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it just remains for me to thank everyone assembled. Our partner, ERM, who's been working and supporting many GRESB participants in Korea, our guest speakers, Yunmi and John, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing. Also, Eric from Amsterdam, getting up a little early in your day. And then finally, for the attendees and participants, thank you very much for your time and attention. As mentioned at the outset, we are doing our Career Roadshow next week. The participation window for GRESB opens on Thursday, 1st of April. We're more than happy to address any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cheers, bye.